Okay. You're
Can I-
on.
Oh, I'm just
You're-
on. Okay.
Yep,
So
you're on.
I'll talk for a little bit and hopefully be able to take some questions from all of you. Obviously, I'm Andrea Campbell and a candidate for Attorney General. And I jumped into the race really recognizing that families right now are struggling and they're very worried about whether or not they're going to be able to thrive and prosper and rebound, not just economically, mentally as well, coming out of COVID. And I think at the same time, they're frustrated with government and don't necessarily see government as a solution to the very issues they're grappling with every single day. And what I've been stressing since we launched this campaign a few months ago is that not only do we live in the best state in the nation, but that government and especially the Attorney General's office can indeed help residents with their daily struggles and almost any issue they're grappling with. And how do I know we live in the best state in the nation? I think I'm actually living proof. I had a childhood filled with incredible instability. When I was 8 months old, my mother actually died in a car accident, going to visit my father, who's incarcerated at the time. My father and my brothers cycled in and out of the prison system, and my twin brother, Andre, would die 10 years ago while in the custody of the Department of Correction as a pretrial detainee when he was only 29 years old. And so I'm the first actually in my family to go to college, the first in my family to go to law school and become a lawyer. And I've dedicated my entire life to making sure every resident in this state has access to the same opportunities I had. And I've used that pain, frankly, and turned it into living a life and working in living a life of purpose. And I've done the work in different ways. I started my legal career representing children in education cases for free, especially students with disabilities and families that fell below the poverty line, holding charter schools, traditional public schools, parochial schools, private schools, you name it, all of them accountable to delivering an excellent education for our children. I've worked in state government as an attorney for Governor Deval Patrick, where I handled a whole host of issues for him, legislation, transportation, education agencies, clearly, and obviously worked with the AG's office on a whole host of matters. And I served as general counsel of a regional planning agency that covers 101 municipalities in the state, pushing for regional equity, which I know is still a major issue. And I know some of you may know, I've done it as a local elected official in the city of Boston. And I'm running for Attorney General, stressing that this office is more than just the chief law enforcement office. Yes, implement our laws safely and fairly and ensure that our communities are safe. But the office has all the tools, the resources, the talent to make sure every family has access to healthcare, including mental health and behavioral health services, access to a living wage, to benefits, all the tools to stay in your home, to buy a home, to grow your wealth, every tool to deal with racial disparities, public corruption, all the tools to protect us, of course, against predatory practices, especially seniors, and all the tools to ensure the neighborhoods in which we live or raising our children, those communities are more resilient and more prepared for the next climate event or even the next pandemic. And at the end of the day, I also think it's about making sure the next generation does better than the last, which is really important to me, breaking these cycles of poverty and trauma for my two boys, but for other families in the Commonwealth. And I have two boys. The artwork behind me is not mine. It is my two beautiful boys. And I am happy to be on with all of you tonight. I'm honored to have the support of Senator Markey, former Congressman Kennedy. Environmental League of Massachusetts just came out to support my candidacy this week, and many other electeds representing every county in Massachusetts, but I'm not taking anything or anyone for granted. So I'm really happy to be here with all of you tonight and hope to answer your questions on the issues you care about the most. And I'm done talking at you because that would be a very boring Zoom. So thank you for your patience.
Does anybody have any questions?
Jean does.
Deb?
No, I said Jean does. She had
Oh,
her
Jean,
hand
I'm
up.
sorry, Jean?
Yeah, hi, thanks.
Hi,
Hi, Andrea. One of the things I've liked about what Maura Healy has done with the office is to keep an eye on the national scene
That's right.
and to bring lawsuits when our democracy is being threatened, and other things like that. And I'm wondering if you could talk some about that and how you see yourself fitting into that picture.
Absolutely. It's frankly building upon the work of Maura. I have, of course, talked to every AG going back to Frank Bellotti, who just turned 99, by the way, this month, and the first assistants and others who have worked in the office and others who still work in the office. And what is said is the next AG always builds upon the work of the previous AG and AGs. And I think that's significant. And in the context of the national scene, protecting our democratic institutions, it's critically important. Obviously, we had to deal with a certain, 4 years with the Trump administration. There were a lot more lawsuits. Clearly, we have more allies right now at the federal level than we did before. But that being said, the next layer of the work is going to be looking at the Supreme Court. Reproductive health care, obviously, we have work to do to protect folks in this state. There's going to be legislation we're going to have to pass here to protect providers. Connecticut just did some work, New York, and also following other decisions that will likely come out of the court that will not be favorable, that may be rolling back protections against for civil rights and other things that folks have fought for generations. Clearly, our office is going to have to show up and exercise leadership on those issues. National context, climate. We have a national reputation of doing great work with respect to climate. That has to continue, as well as addressing the opioid crisis and going after bad actors in those contexts. And one thing that's coming up in the last month, as I have more conversations, is inflation and price gouging, and whether or not there should be something done through the AGs on those issues related to corporations that are price gouging, which is having a major effect on supply of certain products and, of course, on residents as well from a consumer protection standpoint. So there's a lot to do, and there's a lot to do from a national context for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean, for the question.
Is there any other questions at this time?
Yes.
Sally?
Yep, thank you.
All
So
right, Sally, I just
let's
lost
talk about
Hi.
excuse me?
I just
Am I-
lost you. I tried to expand my screen to be able to see
Oh.
the person to make Zoom feel more interactive.
Are we
So
all
you're back
set?
on my screen. Good to see
Okay,
you.
good. Can we please talk about the January 6ers and domestic white terrorists and how they're infiltrating our town government and so on?
Mhm.
We could talk for an hour of what's happening here in Mansfield.
Yes, and it's like you said, it's not just Mansfield, it's a whole bunch of local communities. I was on a call with a woman who was doing a lot of work in Hamilton and said, Andrea, we feel very alone out here in terms of being able to protect our democratic principles and values and institutions because of some of the infiltration we're seeing. Even some candidates who are now running for local offices in certain communities, very divisive, toxic language, hate. And I do think the AG's office, frankly, can be showing up a lot more. We're seeing it in our schools, for example. All types of hate crimes, and some of it's reported in the newspapers, some of it is not with respect to what the Civil Rights Division and the AG's office is dealing with. And so what's happening in our communities is also, of course, reflected in what's happening with our young people and in our schools. And I think there's a presence and a greater presence for the AG's office to show up to say, we are also here not just to implement and enforce laws, but to protect our residents from discrimination, from hate crime, and all types of things that would interfere with the safety and well-being. And so there's a lot more to do. And I'll just add one point, Sally. The AG's office, in order to, I think, be effective in the job and in the work, needs to establish a presence in communities. There are some satellite offices in various communities like Springfield, New Bedford, Worcester. I've gone into those communities and most folks don't even know those satellite offices exist. They don't have relationships. So how do we, of course, build better relationships in community, expand our community engagement efforts to truly build partnerships with the AG's office and folks on the ground to respond to some of these concerns in real time and be more proactive versus always reactive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think, Martha, did you want to say something?
I think Joe had his hand up first. You want to go
Oh,
ahead?
Joe, I'm sorry.
Hi, Joe.
I was going to say Martha can go first, but since we said hi to each other already.
You have a very dark background.
Yeah, I know. I working on it. Let me see if I can get it right here.
We can see you.
So I was saying to your aide earlier that if you get a house party at 124 West Selden Street in Mattapan, that's where I grew up.
Oh, wow.
So that's what.
That's up the
you-
street from me. I live in Mattapan.
Wow.
I live in
Wow.
Mattapan on Groveland Street.
Wow, okay, well,
That's right
we have a
up
house
the block
party.
to your
I'll go
house.
there. Love to go see it again.
Yeah,
I'm undecided on who I support for Attorney General. I'm certainly considering you.
thank
So
you.
this is not going to be a hostile question, although it could come across that way, but it's a serious question. On charter schools, I don't have a real strong opinion, and charter schools doesn't really hold a lot of sway with me one way or the other when I vote. But there's a perception. I haven't watched it closely. Maybe it's not the reality, but there's a perception that you haven't really answered it well, or it's been answered clumsily. Maybe you have a nuanced opinion on it, which I think is more than fine, especially in issues like that. But I'd appreciate it if you could provide some clarity on that.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, and you're welcome to visit me in Mattapan anytime. I'll see you obviously in your community too. So it's not a black and white issue for me. So I live in Mattapan, and I used to represent on the Boston City Council, Mattapan and Dorchester, which are two of the poorest communities in Boston and predominantly a district of color. And we do have some charter schools situated within my current district and in my current community, providing services to students. And in my support of charter schools as a local elected stem from the fact that many of my families were choosing those schools. Why? Because in Mattapan, for example, like my two boys, you have a 5% chance of getting into a high quality Boston public school compared to some other neighborhoods in Boston where it's 80%. And so those families were choosing what was best for their children. And many are very poor. So either it's a charter school, a METCO school, or they pray and hope for a scholarship to some other type of school system. I went to 5 Boston public schools. I firmly believe in the traditional public school system, but I also live in reality that those families needed a choice. My goal has always been, of course, to improve our traditional public schools so our families don't have to go elsewhere. And I will say I had an excellent experience going through my 5 BPS schools. I wouldn't have made it to a Princeton University and been successful, or UCLA Law School and been successful. That being said, there is misinformation out there about this ballot question. The ballot question about an expansion of charter schools went down in flames some years ago. It is not coming back. And I do not think the AG's office has a role in pushing for the expansion of charter schools. It is about accountability, about making sure that these systems are held accountable and delivering an excellent education for our children. And I'm the only candidate in this race, and maybe the only candidate ever for Attorney General that's actually represented children as young as 6 years old with disabilities, with IEPs, school discipline cases, you name it, to ensure those families had access to a high quality education, holding charter schools accountable. I had cases against them, traditional public schools, and all types of school systems that either over-disciplined, didn't treat our students well, pushed out students with disabilities, or pushed out other students as well. And that accountability piece is critical for an AG, and it's frankly would build upon my leadership it would build upon my leadership in the work I've done before, and something I'm very passionate about.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I think Martha's next.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you for
Hi,
being
Martha.
I was struck by what you had mentioned about the AG's office having the tools to be able to help with housing and to growing wealth. And I was just wondering what some of those tools were, or what some initiatives you might envision, and how you might be implementing those. If you could just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Awesome. Thank you, Martha, for the question. A whole host of ways. One is, as we are crisscrossing the state, there is real concern amongst many families about a potential foreclosure crisis after COVID, and concerns about losing one's home. Back in 2008, 2009, including under Martha Coakley and some others, innovative things were done to work with financial institutions to keep families in their homes through all types of initiatives started in the AG's office, including actually getting resources and establishing a grant program or grant programs to provide residents with capital and resources to buy a home or to move from a tenant situation to a first-time homebuyer situation. So these innovative affirmative policies were done in the past and can absolutely be done now. I also think there's a role to play on supportive housing in the context of drug abuse, domestic violence, homelessness. Many of these issues, of course, are all connected, whether it's pharmaceutical dollars or other settlement funds the AG's office gets, incredible flexibility on how to use those dollars. And as we're going into communities talking about drug abuse, opioid crisis, people waiting for beds, the same thing in the context of seniors and elders dealing with homelessness. I was just in Haverhill talking about the long waiting list for assisted living situations or living facilities for elders. And that's a whole nother conversation where I think the AG's office can play a greater role, but senior housing, critically important. Discrimination is coming up quite a bit. AG's office, critical role there. Even, for example, we've been hearing stories about discrimination based on lead paint. Folks not willing to rent to families because they don't want to comply with lead paint provisions in the state. Discrimination based on if you're a voucher holder status or other types of discrimination we're seeing as well in the state. Zoning conversations around affordable housing. I think the AG's office has a role to play in all these different kinds of conversations, should be present. And because it is an office that's independent and has significant credibility and really should be leaving the politics out, I think is uniquely positioned to convene more folks on what these innovative policy initiatives can be, whether started by the AG's office or one in which the AG's office, of course, plays a role with the governor and others. And there's more to say on that, but I know there are other hands up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Martha.
I think Tyler's next. Tyler?
Yeah,
Hi, Tyler.
yeah, my main question has to deal with New Bedford and the Ash Street Jail. You know, there's been a lot of issues. You know, I've been working with BCCJ, which is Bristol County Correctional Justice. You know, it's been around since the 1880s. And there's been a lot of problems with family, you know, trying to, you know, to be able to contact people in jail, you know, because of the COVID, you know,
Yep.
problems with costs of virtual calls as well as, you know, suspension of in person.
Yep.
So, you know, so families and, you know, and that affects families because the families generally have to pay for things like that. And when they move them from one jail to another, or if they go out for health care, getting health care has been an issue, like knee surgery or hip surgery, you know, and having, you know, psychiatric drugs because, you know, a lot of these people, most of these people are mentally ill and they're on psychiatric drugs and they can't usually have them when they're in jail. So
That's right.
so that, you know, so that's that I think is a much wider issue, but the issue is a mold and stuff like that, because it sounds like that Baker supports Hodgson, which is what supports the current conditions in the jail, because he believes that harsh punishment leads people to be better citizens when they leave.
Yep.
So therefore they want to deny, you know, things like healthcare and support, you know, and access to their families and stuff like that. So that,
Yeah, go ahead, Tyler. Go ahead.
so that, you know, I didn't know how you felt about that. It sounded like that Baker supports the current situation. You know, there've been a lot of complaints about, you know, there's a lot of mold in this building, and a lot of people, even normal people, need over-the-counter or prescription drugs to handle mold, and that's not allowed there. So therefore, I think that mold in places where people can't vote with their feet is much more important to enforce than, you know, public places like a restaurant where a person, as long as they know about it, they can go to a different restaurant.
That's right. I hear you.
So
I
this-
will, go ahead, Tyler. I don't know if you have a question or not, but I have a lot
No,
to
the
say
main
on
feeling
this.
of how you feel
Yeah.
about the situation about, or haven't you never even heard about it? Because I think it is a legal thing about legal rights. It sounds like Attorney General would be the place. I think we talked about Healy. I think Vince talks about to Healy about it, but I think that this particular case, I think because the governor supports this condition, because he supports Hodgson personally, is blocking those things. So therefore, until we get a Democratic governor in,
Okay,
it
Mhm.
probably wouldn't change.
her
But I
answer
just
the
want to know
question.
what your opinion is.
Mhm.
let her answer it.
Absolutely. So Tyler, first of all, thank you for the question. These are issues I care deeply about. I still have loved ones who are incarcerated. And I mentioned my twin brother, Andre, who died while in the custody of the Department of Correction. He was bounced around from MCI Shirley Medium, at one moment Sousa Baranowski. So I've been probably the only candidate that has been to a significant number of prisons and jails over my lifetime. And I talked about my mom, obviously, but my dad was also incarcerated for the first 8 years of my life. When I was at Princeton, I talked to him one morning. He died that same evening. And so I will just say my life has been connected to that system in many ways. So the conditions in which we confine folks, major issue in this state that we have to grapple with. Asbestos, like you said, in this particular jail, I've heard a lot of stories. I was actually recently in Rehoboth, meeting with some delegates and folks there who were talking about things that are happening within Bristol County, also within the jail. So significant work to do. And what I've been stressing is that the Attorney General's office is uniquely positioned to address these issues because, one, if you prioritize it, which I will, and that it's not just criminal legal reform, conditions of confinement, but that's juvenile justice. All of it is connected. These are examples, frankly, of public corruption. But if you prioritize the issues, the AG is the state's attorney over all of these institutions and has significant power to leverage to say, we are not going to accept that this is how we treat another human being. We are not going to accept the conditions of confinement. We're not going to treat family members, as you suggested, who are, of course, also a part of this, as if they also are guilty or something. I've visited different places. I know how traumatic that can be for a family member, how difficult it can be for a family member, or even a loved one, a lawyer, someone with a religious background who's trying to go visit someone in one of a DOC or HOC facility. And there's a lot of things that occur there that I think the AG's office must and need to address. So I know I talked quite a bit on this one, but it's something I care deeply about, and I think the AG's office needs to be doing a lot more.
Thank you. Sharon, did you want to say something?
Hi, Sharon. Thank you, Tyler. Hi, Sharon.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yes, I do. So Andrea, good to hear your point so far. And I'm wondering how you see that the Attorney General's office could address some of the student loan debt. I know a few people that are very much in debt only because of the daily interest rate applied to a loan that has been turned over from one servicer to another and when one does not have an advocate and when one doesn't know how this system works, the loan that you had, and I know this personally for someone, the loan that a person had from an institution went from $5,000 to $35,000 in a matter of 6 months. So I'm wondering what, and this person is now unemployed and has a disability. So I'm wondering, number one, what your thoughts are about this, and number two, if there's something that your office would be able to do to help this person out. So should he choose to seek that help?
Thank you, Sharon, for the question. It's a major issue. I do know that's one area that the AG's office is doing, I think, significant work. Some of it isn't necessarily known. Some of it's in the context of for-profit institutions taking advantage of students and young people, and using various loan packages that are quite outrageous, frankly. So there's some work that the office is doing there. It's not necessarily known, but there's a lot more to do. I was just on another Zoom actually with a young person who was talking about paying more of the principal and being penalized in his next statement for doing that. Them not applying it to the principal, but sort of taking some of the resources and applying it to interest, and how he had to call Navient and I think it's still Navient, and had to argue with them to get them to actually change that, which is unacceptable because it's something that's actually happening with more folks. So I think there's more the office can do. If we can take on bad actors in the context of the opioid crisis or climate, this is one area we need to pay attention to. I'm actually, as a law school student, still paying off some of my student loan debt from law school. It is personal for me. And I have chosen a life of service and a purpose-driven life. And so that's okay. But these programs that are designed to actually help students look at other career pathways of service. And so these programs are unique and and needed. So I think one is, what does it mean to take on bad actors that are taking advantage of our students and young people and adults and adult learners? The second piece is, how do we actually educate folks and let them know that the office actually has tools and resources to help them on these issues? Most do not know. The last piece is what's happening at the federal level, the conversations around the canceling of student debt, et cetera. Our office is showing up with many of the folks in our federal delegation on those issues, including maintaining the public interest programs, of course, that we want to actually be expanded upon. Critically important that the AG's office continue to show up at the national level in these conversations as well. And then one last piece, as we continue to get out there and educate folks, student athletes, that's coming up quite a bit. You go to a college, you get a scholarship as an athlete, you injure yourself, you can no longer play, you lose that scholarship, suddenly you're stuck having to pay the bill. Major issue that came up in a conversation with folks in Springfield. And so if we know that to be the case, and most of these students can't afford to be there otherwise, how do we protect them? How do we educate them? And what else can we do? I think there's a lot more the AG's office can do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Okay, we have one more person that wanted to talk. Christian, you want to say something?
Hi, Christian,
Yes.
how are you?
Hi, Andrea. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for
thank-
being here.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. You spoke powerfully about the conditions in our prisons, and from personal experience of the criminal legal system in your family. And I know you've been an advocate for restorative justice models in the past. And I wonder if you could just say a little bit about that, about specifically what the role of the AG's office can be in making Massachusetts a leader in imagining new ways of addressing harm, and advancing decarceration rather than just improving the conditions in an existing system.
Thank you, Christian, for that question. A lot more, which is another set of issues under this umbrella of criminal legal reform or reimagining our systems. I was just actually, and I use stories because some work is actually happening in various communities at the local level, not statewide though. And so I was in Amherst, for example, meeting with an organization that is addressing food insecurity. That same organization is passionate about some of the reimagining of police that they have going on in Amherst, where they're using innovative models with behavioral health clinicians, sending those folks out to calls where there may be some incident where someone needs to respond. I mean, at this place where they're addressing food insecurity, there are folks who show mental health concerns, where they sometimes have to call someone. They don't usually want to call a police officer, they want someone else to show up. So there's some innovative partnerships there where they actually will call the police department, but it's directed to folks who are behavioral health clinicians. Some people refer them as the best team or something like that, where they go and lead the response rather than say a police officer. So some of this innovation is happening. I was meeting with the sheriff out in Franklin County, the task force with the district attorney and others on ways in which to not only improve conditions of in the House of Correction there, but they're doing innovative things around restorative justice. Some of it is not necessarily known. Again, it's a statewide issue. And so how do we actually use the power of the office to convene all stakeholders to actually put forth a strategy and plan on expanding these efforts, given towns and communities that don't necessarily have these types of resources, as say a Boston or some other community, give them the resources to test out best practices, innovate and do new things in the context of public safety. There's an appetite, there's a desire on the ground. It just needs to be a statewide conversation that is led by somebody. And I think the AG's office is uniquely positioned to do just that. And hopefully working right with the next governor and other elected officials to be a part of some of this too. And there are resources. Folks sometimes suggest there's not enough resources. There are. A lot of inefficiencies, as you probably know, in government. There are, to redirect to things that actually work and that actually reduce recidivism rates.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea. We appreciate you coming tonight and
Thank
speaking
you.
to us and answering many questions that you could possibly answer. If they have any further questions, they could contact your campaign personally.
That's right.
And we wish you the best of luck in your campaign, and thank you for coming again.
Thank
Andrea,
you.
can you put your campaign information in the chat?
Absolutely.
Okay,
So
great.
Tamika on my team will make sure all my information's in the chat. I hope to earn your support at the convention and of course in September. And thank you all again for being on tonight and allowing candidates to come and answer your questions. Thank you. Stay safe
Thank
and
you.
healthy, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe we have our second guest speaker at this time. Kim, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. I've been listening to this riveting conversation. I'm so curious as to what might happen.
Okay, this is Salem Mayor Kim Driscoll, candidate for Lieutenant Governor, speaking at this time, folks. Go ahead, Kim, you have the floor.
Good evening, folks. Thanks for allowing me to practice some seatbelt democracy here and zoom into your meeting. I'm Kim Driscoll. I'm the mayor of Salem, and I'm a candidate for Lieutenant Governor. Serving as mayor in Salem has not been my first foray into local government. I actually worked for the city of Chelsea when they were coming out of receivership, first as their chief legal counsel and then later as their deputy city manager. I really appreciated the opportunity to work in an environment where a city really had fallen down on its knees and help bring it back. Certainly taught me the value of good government and who pays the price when there are failures in leadership. But I had lived in Salem, always had lived in Salem. I should say, though, I'm not a native of Salem. I'm actually a Navy brat. I was born in Hawaii, lived on all coasts and throughout the United States. My dad grew up in Lynn. My mom is from Trinidad. And I came to Salem to go to college, fell in love with the city and fell in love with my husband, Nick, who is a member of Local 3, a union bricklayer. And together we've raised our 3 kids in Salem. I saw a need for action in my hometown in 2005. And I ran for mayor intent on, improving city services, helping address some major fiscal deficits our community was facing, and really trying to move Salem forward. It always felt like a city that had a lot of history and a lot of assets, and we took 2 steps forward and 1 step back. 16 years later, Salem is a hip, historic, vibrant destination. We're the 3rd most visited destination in Massachusetts. We've been able to make historic investments in schools and infrastructure and parks. And the reason I'm excited about the opportunity to serve as Lieutenant Governor is I really understand the close connection between cities and towns and the state. And our communities, when they're working well, our Commonwealth is working well. And frankly, we can't have a healthy and strong state without cities and towns really bearing the brunt of the action that's required. As a mayor, I've been on the front lines from COVID response and recovery, working hard to try and mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis in a coastal community. We have our own climate action plan. Working to make our housing more affordable. We're a city that used to be the place you could pour coffee and pour a beer for a living and put a roof over your head. And that right now is really not the case. I chair the Salem School Committee. We work hard to strengthen our public schools. Kids have been some of the biggest victims of this pandemic. We have a tremendous amount of work to do coming into this next, not only serving our children well, but we're addressing the shortage in the educator pipeline. So many of our staff are feeling completely worn out. And in this new world of work and work from home, I think we're going to see it being increasingly harder to hire staff to work in public schools. We need to come to terms with that, start growing our own pipeline and the like. I know none of that can happen without a strong partner, a real champion for communities in the State House. As mayor, I like to say I'm part of the Get Stuff Done wing in local government. There's really no hiding in a job like mine. You're making decisions every day. They impact your neighbors, the people that you know. And I think it makes you a little bit more accountable. I've been reelected now 5 times. And I think there's certainly folks who don't agree with every decision coming out of City Hall, but I think they appreciate the approach that we take to listening and know that when we make decisions, we're making them in the best interest of our community. That same sensibility and sense of urgency and experience and skill set is what I hope to take to the State House to work with our next governor, partner, rolling up the sleeves to work on issues that really matter and impact the quality of life and where people live. I think we're heading into an historic time frame, one where we have a tremendous amount of resources, but one where we also have a tremendous amount of uncertainties. We know inflation is rising, interest rates are up, supply chain is being impacted. We could be in for some choppy waters and some course correction with the economy in Massachusetts. I've managed a city through a recession. I know how challenging that can be. And I also know what opportunities exist with these historic resources we have, just one-time federal dollars that we want to put to good use, make sure we're thinking about long-term economic prosperity. I'd be thrilled to have your consideration in this race. I think that cities are often a cause, what's happening in cities is really just a reaction to some of the challenges we have at the state. And I'd like to be in a position to sort of use my work and the lens that I bring in local government in the State House. We're a microcosm of what's happening at the state, and we're not going to solve any of our most pressing challenges without action in communities. So I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions. And again, really appreciate your time and the work you're doing. Not just thinking about statewide races, but certainly the conversation I just heard about what's happening in your hometown and really caring about that where it matters.
Okay, do we have any questions for Kim? Anybody like to say anything? Well, I don't see any hands up. Nobody.
I
Oh,
can always.
Sally?
I can
Sally
always
always
come
has a
up with a question. So you've worked with the governor's office and as a course of the being mayor, can you give some good examples of how you've had that partnership between the city and the governor's office?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's countless examples of both public investments. You know, Salem has the busiest commuter rail stop in the MBTA system. We needed a new facility, a full high platform. We wanted to really make sure we were serving our constituents well. So we worked to allocate the resources. Right now, we're working as part of a community effort that will have an offshore wind hub in Salem. We had one of the filthy 5 coal plants on our port, built in 1950. It really had to go for a lot of different reasons. It was also our #1 taxpayer, though, and something that we had to work closely with the state as that plant closed down to think about how we remedy some of the challenges with the financing and also push forward with a new facility. Right now, there's a quick starting natural gas plant on that site that has a 2050 timeline to operate, and then their permit expires. And directly adjacent to that will be the home of a new offshore wind hub for Massachusetts. And we're excited about playing a pivotal role in our clean energy future. But none of that happens without a lot of intentionality, putting together plans, working closely with state officials and the private sector to bring to bear these sort of operational changes and also exciting, ways to build local economic prosperity. It won't just be local in this case, certainly will be regional. There's countless other examples I could give you from our climate action work, we've already expanded pre-K. I think that is certainly something I hope the state will adopt, like so many other states have as well. High quality pre-K offerings can make a big difference for working families, for our youngest learners. We've worked with the state on some of those models, both from a grants perspective, trying to make sure we have the technical assistance in place to make sure we're also putting metrics to measure the success of these programs. Those are just a few examples. There's a whole heck of a lot more where cities and towns very much have a symbiotic relationship with the state.
Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Ronald Green.
Yeah. I'm just curious, excuse me, growing up in Boston and everything and living in Mansfield, I have no idea. I never give any thought to what the diversity makeup is of Salem.
Yeah, we're actually a gateway city that's pretty diverse. We teach in over 45 languages. Our largest minority population is Latino, primarily from the Dominican Republic. But we have a growing Albanian population, a growing Cambodian population. And Salem has, certainly been an international destination and an immigrant community for nearly 400 years. So we've had waves of different immigrants that have come to our community. And frankly, we're really proud of that history and trying to be a community that's very welcoming and supporting our diverse population.
Oh, okay. And my other question was your school systems. What are they like?
We're a gateway city, so education is definitely the most important work we do, but it's also the most challenging. We have a comprehensive high school. We're working closely right now, as I mentioned, on not only our youngest learners, expanding pre-K, really seeing that as an opportunity to have more of our third graders reading at level by that time frame. We're also really investing closely in both early college. We have Salem State University right in our borders, as do many gateway cities, to provide better college pathways for our students and career pathways. Our vocational programs are really part of our strong suit. And we know there are so many students for whom developing a mastery in a skill can be a job as they pursue both workforce and further college or career opportunities. We're excited about that work, but I will also tell you it is challenging, not just during this pandemic and coming out of it, but even beforehand. We have lots of kids who were read to every night since birth. We have lots of kids who come into our schools who have a lot of needs, and we pride ourselves on trying to serve everyone in a way that allows for opportunities for success.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim.
Okay.
We know you have an 8:30 appointment you have to make, so we'll let you go at this time. Thank you for joining us this evening. And hopefully you'll get your information to our secretary. We'll get it on our website to let people contact you if they'd like to meet you. Okay.
Thanks so much. Appreciate your consideration and the work you're doing. Take
Thank
care.
you. Have a good night.
Too.